This is my 2016 Honda CBR500r, and if I had to describe it in one line, I'd say it's the best motorcycle that somebody could hate. I mean, I've owned the bike for 6 years now, and I certainly don't hate it, so I'll have to explain what I mean, but that's going to take more than one line. This video will be a full review covering everything I could think of about this bike, the good, the bad, and the changes I've made to it, but first I want to tell you the somewhat crazy story of how I bought it. The whole reason I was looking for a new motorcycle in the first place is because my job was about 40 minutes from home, and I was going to college over an hour away in a different direction, so I was driving over 400 miles a week. It didn't make sense to be using all the gas and putting all the wear and tear on my BMW, and my Suzuki DRZ400 was not very good for riding on the highway, so I started looking into street bikes for the first time in my life. All I really knew was that 600cc sport bikes were really fast and uncomfortable, which is not what I wanted at all, so when I first came across the CBR500r, it sounded perfect for me. And it was. The Honda CBR500r is a racing machine. On the other hand, the CBR500r actually has the same low-compression, fuel-efficient motor used in the Honda Rebel 500, Honda CB500F, CB500X, and more, I think. The 500r has the looks of a legitimate sport bike, but it just really isn't the same thing. Anyway, I watched all the reviews I could find on YouTube, and everyone had good things to say. Well, everyone except Yami Noob. This bike just isn't on his frequency, but I knew right away the 500r would be my next bike. I found this one on Craigslist in September of 2017 with 3,800 miles on it for just $4,300 out the door. It was at a Ford Lincoln Mercury dealership where somebody had traded it in for a new car. $4,300 was a really good price for a 1-year-old 500r, and it might actually still be worth just as much. The only catch was that the dealership was in Boise, Idaho, which is almost 500 miles from where I live. Luckily, my girlfriend was more than happy to ride with me to Boise and drive my car home for me. I put down a deposit to keep anybody else from buying it because it took me about 2 weeks to get all the money together. We drove all the way there in one day, which took about 8 hours, stayed at a relative's house, and arrived at the dealership around 10 a.m. the next day. The bike had zero damage and was completely stock except for the hand levers. I couldn't find anything wrong with it, and the test ride down the street and back went great, so I had no hesitation in agreeing to buy it.
It is so nice.
I signed all the paperwork, paid in cash, sprayed some lube on the chain, and installed a better windscreen for the long ride home. Almost as soon as we left the dealership, we were on a freeway with a speed limit of 85 miles an hour, which was kind of intense, and the whole trip home took 11 very uncomfortable hours, including lots of brakes and a rainstorm. So basically, my first real ride on this bike was also the worst ride of my life so far. But we made it home, and I've been enjoying the bike ever since. So let's really dig into the video now, starting with the things that I really like about this bike. The somewhat upright rider position gives me a reasonable amount of comfort for longer rides. It makes the bike easy to maneuver at low speeds, like in a parking lot. I can still get tucked down behind the windscreen when needed, but it probably feels more natural on a real sport bike like a 600. At 5'9" with a 32-inch inseam, I have no problem putting both feet on the ground when sitting on this bike, but riders shorter than about 5'4" might want to lower the bike, while riders taller than 6'4" might be interested in raising the bike, or just getting a different bike altogether. The controls of the bike are very basic. There aren't any riding modes or ABS settings to change, just throttle, clutch, brakes, and a 6-speed gearbox, which is very nice for cruising on highways. Because of its simplicity and maneuverability, the 500r makes for an excellent beginner motorcycle that just about anybody should be able to handle with the proper training. It has enough power to beat most cars off the line, but you're not going to do any accidental wheelies. I can't even do any on-purpose wheelies with this bike, but I've seen it done. Another reason this bike is great for beginners is that, well, it's a Honda. It's not going to break down often or leave you stranded. Just keep the chain lubricated, change the oil every 8,000 miles, follow my awesome videos showing how to perform the scheduled services, and this bike should just keep going, and you know the thing. In factory form, this bike was getting 70 miles per gallon with my mix of highway and city riding, but I actually averaged 80 miles per gallon on a trip I did down the Oregon coast and back, with very few stops. If you're interested in doing some longer trips, the CBR500r can hold plenty of luggage with the right setup. I haven't tried to pack a tent and all my camping gear on this bike yet, but I think I could make it work. Thanks to the sporty handling and low-end power, you should be able to keep up with your friend's 600RR on twisty roads, but you'll never hit 160 miles an hour on a 500R, that's for sure. The top speed of this bike is only about 108 miles per hour as measured by GPS, but I consider that a good thing. I'm not planning any trips to the racetrack, and I don't need to be going anywhere near 108 on public roads. For me, the fun part is getting up to speed, not speeding to the point that any amount of misfortune could end the game. This bike looks great, and it's not just my opinion. Almost any time I park in a public place, somebody will come up and compliment my Honda. They don't care that it's only a 500, and neither do I. When I was shopping for a 500R, I was hoping to get a tricolor model and didn't really like this color scheme much, but it has seriously grown on me. It just looks so clean. Adding to the looks of this bike are the 160mm wide rear tire, which is similar to larger displacement sport bikes, as well as the full-size engine that fills out the frame compared to smaller models like a 250 or a 300. The LED headlights and taillights on models made from 2016 on look really good and work really good. I especially like that both headlights have low beams, unlike the traditional sport bike design that uses one headlight for low beam and one for high beam. I could probably list a few more small things I like about my Honda, but I think I hit all the main points, so let's move on to the bad stuff. I think the biggest elephant in the room is the fact that most people will eventually outgrow this bike. There will come a time when you twist the throttle all the way, and it just won't be enough anymore. Also, there are a lot of luxuries and better technology offered on higher-end motorcycles. And while I plan to keep my 500R forever, because it's just so good at what it was made for, I've had my eye on an Italian girl for a while now, so I guess I'll just have to own 2 sport bikes. There are worse things that could happen. The suspension on this motorcycle is kind of a weak point, especially if you race or do a lot of aggressive riding, but I don't, so it never really bothered me. The front suspension has adjustable dampers from 2016 on, but the rear shock is not adjustable on my bike. It sounds like there's something rattling near the dash at about 5,000 RPM on some models, including mine. I've read that it can be the windscreen rattling against the fairing, and I plan to make a video on fixing that soon, but I can only hear it when I'm not wearing earplugs, which isn't very often. The motor sounds like a lawnmower. Okay, I said it. I thought it sounded pretty good until somebody online pointed this out. I kinda argued with them and said it sounded good to me, especially with an aftermarket exhaust, but the very next day I was riding through town at about 30 miles an hour, and all I could hear was a lawnmower. Cops think it's faster than it really is. The first time I was pulled over on the 500R, the cop literally thanked me for stopping and not just taking off. I tried to explain it was just a 500, but he just stared at the bike and didn't seem to understand. The third time I was pulled over on it, I was going about 73 miles an hour in a 65 zone, but the officer said he got me on radar doing 96, which was a complete lie. He didn't give me a ticket because I was adamant that this didn't make any sense, but it was a really stressful experience. And the second time I got pulled over, I deserved it. The high beams are not very good for riding at night. I've done plenty of 2 a.m. rides home from work with the Honda, and the low beams work fine, but the high beam is like a spotlight that barely lights up the road. I tried installing auxiliary lights once for better coverage, but there just wasn't a good place to mount them. It's probably best not to ride at 2 a.m. very often anyway. There is no way to unleash any significant gain of power from this motor with any modification of any sort. You can spend thousands on a full exhaust, tune, power commander, and whatever else, but you're not going to find more than 3 or 4 horsepower that way. If you really want more power, just get a different motorcycle. The last negative thing I'll mention is that the display could really use a gear indicator. It's not a big deal, and maybe Honda's added it to the new bikes, but I was always losing track of what gear I was in, especially since you can't hear the motor over wind noise on the highway. And that's actually a nice segue for us to move into the modifications portion of the video, because one of the first changes I made to this bike was to add an aftermarket gear indicator. I found this one on Amazon, and it was pretty easy to install. It even plugs directly into the bike under the seat. It came with some double-sided tape so you can mount it wherever you want, so I cut down a piece of scrap metal and made a custom mount that connects to one of the clip-ons. Leave a comment if you think I should make a video telling more about how to install and calibrate this thing. I mentioned earlier that the previous owner installed aftermarket hand levers, but I don't know what brand they are or where they came from. They're a little shorter than the stock levers, and they're easily adjustable. I also mentioned that I installed a better windscreen before making the long ride home from the dealership. It's a Puig double bubble windscreen, and it's supposed to help keep the wind off your chest and shoulders while riding at highway speeds, but since I removed the factory windscreen right away, I don't have anything to compare it to. I know I said the hand levers were the only modification made by the previous owner, but that wasn't really true. He also installed this tank pad that helps keep the tank from getting scratched by jacket zippers. One of the first modifications a lot of people do to a new motorcycle is to install a tail tidy kit, which basically replaces the mess of plastic coming off the rear of the bike with a simplified bracket to hold the license plate and rear turn signals. And it wasn't too difficult to install, it probably took half an hour. While I was in there, I also installed a tail light flasher to make myself more visible when stopping. The one I bought came with terrible instructions, but it's highly programmable, so once I figured it out, I was able to customize how many times it flashes and how fast, but there are many versions of this available online. After my long ride home from Idaho, I was sure that I wanted a better seat, or saddle if we're going to use the right word. I was told that a company called Corbin makes some of the best saddles around, so I thought it would be worth it to pay the $339 they were asking. However, the events that followed were a complete mess. The invoice they sent me said that I had ordered a saddle for a CB500F. I contacted the company and was assured that the saddle would fit both bikes. After 2 weeks, I received the saddle, but it didn't come anywhere close to fitting my 500R. I sent some pictures via email and asked about getting a replacement. After 2 days with no reply, I called and left a message asking for help. Then the following Monday, I emailed again, and the next day I got a response saying my photos were not received. I sent the photos again, one at a time, and asked if they were received, but again, no response. The following Tuesday, I emailed again and was told they still did not receive the pictures. Then the employee that was helping me went on vacation and didn't tell me, and didn't assign anybody else to help me. But when he came back, I was sent a return label and told FedEx would come pick up the saddle at my house. However, FedEx did not show up. After a few more emails, and 3 weeks after receiving the wrong saddle, FedEx finally came to pick it up. Corbin manufactured the new saddle and I received it another 3 weeks later, so nearly 2 months from the day I placed the order. And after all that, the stupid thing isn't even very comfortable. I even contacted them about a year later, asking if I could return it for a partial refund, but once again, I was ignored. I'm sure my experience with them wasn't typical, at least I sure hope not, but I couldn't just tell you I purchased an aftermarket saddle without telling you that whole story. Yeah, so moving right along here. I also decided to replace the muffler pretty early on because the factory one was too quiet and kinda ugly. It was also kind of heavy compared to a lot of aftermarket exhausts. After looking at all the options and listening to a lot of sound clips, I landed on the Yoshimura R77 full carbon fiber exhaust. I think it might have been the most expensive option at $521, but I'm still very happy with it. It sounds great and really adds to the appearance of the bike. I saw this rear tire hugger on another 500R and had to have it. There's another model that was easier to find at the time, but it didn't look like it would work as well to keep the rear shock clean. This one is made by Power Bronze, and I could only find it on eBay at the time, but it was easy to install and fits perfectly. My only regret is putting fake carbon fiber right next to real carbon fiber, but nobody seems to care except for me. I got these frame sliders on eBay a long time ago too. People often comment and ask what brand they are or where to get them, but from what I can tell, they aren't being sold anymore. And since I've never dropped this bike, I don't even know if they work, but that's okay. The factory grips looked cheap and didn't seem all that grippy, so I replaced them with these grips made by Spyder. I'm really happy with these. They have the right amount of grip, they're a little thicker than stock and slightly tapered, which feels quite nice. I got this throttle lock for my commute and only used it for about a year. It's basically a makeshift cruise control that has to be constantly adjusted. It seemed kind of helpful for a while, but then I just kind of stopped using it. When the bike was 5 years old, it began taking a long time to start, so I replaced the battery. But I didn't buy just any battery, I got a lithium battery. Lithium batteries are significantly lighter than traditional batteries, lowering the bike's overall weight and center of gravity. They do require a special charger, but they also don't really need to be charged as often, so I've never had to buy a charger. For instance, I can winterize my motorcycle, disconnect the battery, and leave it in storage for 3 to 6 months without using a battery tender or a trickle charger. On the other hand, I have heard that lithium batteries don't work well in very cold climates, so keep that in mind if you're thinking of buying one. After reading a comment from another 500R owner saying, "Add 2 teeth to the rear sprocket and thank me later," I decided to give it a shot. Installing a rear sprocket with more teeth or a front sprocket with fewer teeth will lower the top speed of the bike while increasing the acceleration. It sounded really good, but honestly, I didn't notice any difference other than my fuel economy dropped from 70 miles per gallon to 60. The next time I replace the sprockets, I plan to go back to a factory setup, or possibly reduce the number of teeth at the rear to see how that affects fuel economy. While swapping out the chain and sprockets, I also decided to replace the tires myself for the first time. I made a lot of mistakes, and there's a terrible video I made about it for your entertainment, but what I did right was to choose a set of Michelin Road 5 tires. Everyone seems to agree that the factory Dunlop tires that came with the bike were garbage. Before these, I tried the Pirelli Diablo Rosso 2 tires, which were good, but living in Oregon, I always felt like I should have something more suited for getting caught in the rain.
This guy's boat is getting wet.
The Michelins have been really great for that, inspiring confidence in all situations, and while mine are still pretty new, many people say these tires will last 15,000 miles or more. Michelin has also released an upgraded version known as Road 6, but these ones were much cheaper at the time, and supposedly just as good. The most recent modification I've done was to add a phone mount. There really aren't a lot of options for this bike, but when I asked, most people recommended the quad-lock fork stem mount, so that's what I went with. It requires a special phone case or an adapter that can adhere to your current case. I really like the mounting location and convenience, and I made a video on how to install it, including my first impressions, but now that I've had it for over a year, there are some things that I really don't like, so I should probably make a new video talking about that. Overall, the Honda CBR500r is a fantastic motorcycle. There's nothing it was designed to do that it doesn't do flawlessly, but that doesn't mean it's the right motorcycle for you. In my opinion, this bike is perfect for someone that wants a cheap, fun, and reliable way to get to work or school, to run errands around town, and to take for an occasional spirited ride down the twisty roads near you. Just remember, it's not a race bike, it's not a dirt bike, and it's not a touring bike. It is what it is, but it's really good at it. If you own any of the bikes from the modern Honda 500cc lineup, check out the Honda maintenance videos on my channel, and make sure to subscribe for the best DIY videos on the internet. And until next time, just keep throwing money at it. By the way, you can now support the channel by purchasing this awesome design, available in a t-shirt, long sleeve, and a hoodie, and in a bunch of different colors as well. Check for a link in the description below. The invoice they sent me said that the invoice they sent me said they were making the invoice they sent me said that the invoice they sent me said they were the invoice they sent me say sent me said the invoice they sent me said they were sending the invoice they sent me said the invoice they sent me said I purchased a saddle for a CB the invoice they sent me said I purchased a saddle for a CB500F. I need to get some sleep.